Welcome back to Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers, the podcast devoted to exploring the frontiers of psychedelic medicine and what it takes to cultivate a healthy mind, body, and spirit. I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Steve Thayer, and today, my co-host Dr. Reid Robison and I explore the concept of the middle way. We discuss what it means to take the middle way and the value of doing so, especially in our modern society where we're beset with polarizing ideologies, supernormal stimuli, social media algorithms designed to capture our attention by either making us afraid or angry, etc. We have a good time with this conversation. We hope you have a good time listening to this conversation. Thank you for listening, and please enjoy. Welcome back to Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers. I am Dr. Steve Thayer, here with Dr. Reid Robison. Welcome back, Reid.
Thanks, Steve. How you doing?
I'm good. That was my effort at a little bit more energy. I was looking at our recording for our last episode when I was doing the show notes and editing, and I noticed kind of some low energy. And we were both maybe a little under the weather, a little tired from our Vegas trip.
Yep. But we're back.
We're back. Listeners, we will do our best to inform, enlighten, and entertain you. And to that end, today, we're talking about balance and the middle way. Yeah. So I came to this topic in part because I think about it a lot, just generally. I listen to a lot of podcasts myself. I try not to listen to news because it's terrifying and ridiculous. But it seems to me that a lot of the psychological distress I see in my clients nowadays has something to do, at least to some degree, with a lack of balance or falling out of balance in a variety of ways in their life. So I thought it might be fun to explore the concept of balance in the middle way from a variety of philosophical perspectives, mental health perspectives, and of course, given that the name of this podcast is Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers, we can weave in the psychedelic medicine aspects as well.
Balance is a good word, just because whether you're looking at it through a lens of like Eastern spirituality, like balance might mean enlightenment in that case, or balance just practically speaking in the Western world. I think it's universally something we can all use a reminder about.
Yeah. Yeah, you hear people talk about having, for example, work-life balance. I think about that one in particular. Like when we say have work-life balance, we're saying, you know, you don't want to spend too much time at the office. You don't want to spend too much of your emotional energy on work such that you don't have enough time or energy for the other things in your life that are also important.
Yeah. Yeah, off balance in one area has ripple effects, or it can, into many areas in your life. I have a random tangential thought about balance, though. When I was a kid, I remember, well, if you're from Utah, you would know what family home evening means, right? But like a family gathering where my mother in particular, was teaching something, and she taught about the Egyptian weighing of the heart ceremony.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of that?
I have, yeah.
From the Egyptian Book of the Dead, not the Tibetan Book of the Dead that the psychedelic greats of the 60s like to read, but this is a different one. But it was just a fascinating story of how kids were taught in that culture, in that time, that after you die, you go down to the underworld, and then this beast with like this crocodile or horse-headed beast takes your heart and puts it on a scale. And if it's heavier than a feather, you're screwed. But if it's lighter than a feather, then you can pass on to eternal bliss. And at first I thought, whoa, that's scaring the children. But when I got past that, I thought, wait, what does weighing your heart against a feather mean? And like because it's on a scale, like a balance type scale, that's the tangential tie why I thought of it. But lighter than a feather, what do you think it means?
Well, it makes me think it made me think of the kind of things that make a heart heavy, or that weigh down our hearts, our souls, our spirits, the burdens that we carry that put us out of balance. I think of the emotional states I can get stuck in that make me feel off kilter, off balance, that might contribute to a heavy heart, like jealousy or greed or fear, anger, judgment, prejudice, things like that.
Yeah. Like, it reminds me to let go, to not hold on to things, to not grasp and like get stuck in our own suffering longer than we need to. And it reminds me of the idea that, pain is real, but suffering to a certain extent is optional. If you define it where pain is the, kind of the real physiologic or mental emotional phenomenon, and suffering is your emotional reaction to it.
Right.
And emotions rise and fall, feel them to their completion, and then let go. Otherwise, you're left with this like heavy heart, in a sense.
Yeah. The clinging is what maybe takes us off balance. So we might murder some metaphors here. We might torture them to death. So forgive us. We're going to just try to make sense of this. But I'm thinking of the balance, the middle way that the Buddha talked about. You know more about this than I do, Reid. But is a balance between many things. But one of the poles, the polarities that it's a balance between is, asceticism, complete denial, and indulgence. Right? There's the indulgence in an attachment to sense pleasures, sensory pleasures, on one end of the spectrum, and on the other end of the spectrum is this asceticism, like the Jains might have practiced, the Indian Jains, this old ancient religion where, they would purify themselves through pain. They wouldn't wear clothes. They would fast. They would inflict their body with flesh wounds to purge their karma or whatever.
Yeah. Have you heard of the Sundance ceremony?
I don't think so.
I had an ayahuasca shaman once who participated in it, and he was telling me the story one day in between ceremonies, and my mind was just blown, because this was a Native American type of ritual where you'd get out in the sun, and I don't know much about this, but I've heard the story in a few different ways from people who have been there participating or watching. And you're basically, there might be an altar, a tree, and you're running around it for hours and hours on it and in the sun. And in some instances, they're even like with body piercings tied to the tree. And there's a huge pain component, and there's a transcendent state that they're after in that. It's all in the name of kind of spiritual practices and transcending some of our kind of mortal burdens and kind of a transpersonal focus. But wow, it sounds intense.
That does sound intense. Yeah. The aesthetics, at least they would practice that principle religiously. It was about self-denial, and I'm making the case here that that's maybe a little out of balance. But as far as inflicting, purposeful physical pain on yourself, from a neurological perspective, we know that, one of the reasons, for instance, people will self-harm is because it's a pleasant distraction from their emotional pain, pleasant with quotation marks around. Yeah. They might feel out of balance in the sense that, I've got this emotional upheaval I don't know what to do with. I can't make it stop. It's trauma related. And so sometimes people will harm themselves to experience a little bit of that body's natural pain killers that come online, endorphins, epinephrine, whatever, to then body's natural opiates, I guess, to make them feel better. And then I've heard people in the sort of kink world or the body disfiguration world talk about just the sort of almost psychedelic mind spaces they get into when they are inflicting a lot of pain on themselves, like extreme stuff, like people hanging from hooks. They got big old hooks through their skin, and it looks like it would tear through, and you can see this like circus acts and things like that.
Yeah, the self-harm comment is really an interesting one that we deal with a lot, because when life is chaotic and there's all sorts of unpredictable kind of emotions, and when life is out of control, sometimes people turn to things they can control, like some way of inflicting pain to feel something predictable, right, to take them out of that chaos. But it shows up in so many ways, in so many different like conditions. Like eating disorder behaviors, for example, are often an attempt to control something in life when life feels out of control.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, turn to the thing that you feel like is controllable. And maybe, as I'm just thinking out loud about this, in the spotlight of our topic, balance in the middle way, you could think of that as maybe misguided efforts at achieving balance when you feel totally off kilter, totally
Yeah.
out of balance, right? Misguided in the sense that it's unhealthy, ultimately.
Yeah, they're maladaptive
Yeah.
behaviors, perhaps. But the best we know at the time,
Mm-hmm.
often.
Yeah. Yeah, and in the work that we do, we often encourage people to look at it that way, that you have this part of you that made an effort to solve a problem it didn't know how to solve, and it came up with a workable solution that unfortunately also had some negative consequences. And so because it was the best that it could do, we invite people to have some self-compassion when they look at their own otherwise self-defeating habits.
Yeah, no, I think that's a crucial kind of container to surround it in when looking at these kind of things or doing work around our behaviors and things like that. But this whole idea reminds me of in DBT, there is this concept of the middle path, walking the middle path.
The wise mind.
Yeah, the concept that there are two things that can be true at any given time. Like you're doing the best you can, and you can always do more, right? That kind of concept shows up in that therapy, which I find so helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember growing up often being told, do your best. And it was, do your best was supposed to be like really good, gentle advice. But I've talked about on the podcast before, I'd struggled with some perfectionistic tendencies growing up. And for me, do your best was an impossible standard because you could always do better, right? Upon, when I would debrief in my mind after a football game or after taking a test or whatever, even if I got 100% on a test, it's like, what could you have done better? And when you come from an out of balance deficit mindset, the do your best you could have done better feels like a failure, even if you did very, very well. And I can't remember if I heard it from somebody, but I probably did hear it from somebody. I landed on a phrase that just felt better to me than do your best, and it was be diligent. Diligence felt like something I could practice with less judgment than do your best.
Yeah. I think it ties in well to one of the key principles in Taoism. And when we say Taoism, it's spelt with a T, Taoism, or the Tao, the Tao, ancient Chinese wisdom coming from 2,000 plus years ago. And one of the concepts of non-action is, I think, so important, but also paradoxical and perplexes a lot of people because they might think in our action-oriented society, how am I going to get better, get anywhere with non-action? But if you look at your happiness example, just be happy. Or when we strive for happiness, or we're told by our parents, you should just be happy. That's a dangerous trap,
Right?
Because chasing it can make it more elusive, and it makes sense when you look at your example as well of striving for happiness or this perfect ideal. You're guaranteed to fall short, and therefore in this mindset you're also going to feel down on yourself, and there will be guilt and shame and more of this getting stuck in a loop of trance of unworthiness, perhaps.
Yeah. It's a concept that, I've struggled to fully understand and practice. It's certainly one that my clients struggle with that you're talking about here, Reid, this idea that the harder you strive and reach for happiness, the harder you push it away too, because you're going at it in this very perfectionistic, controlled sort of way, insistent.
Alan Watts calls it the backwards principle. And he says that if you try to float on top of the water, you'll sink. If you try to sink, you'll float. Or if you strive too much for, for security, you'll have more insecurity. And it does make sense when you picture at times you might be grasping at something and it's like chasing your own tail.
Yeah. Yeah. Or we were talking about this before we hit record. This is a bizarre metaphor, but I was making scrambled eggs the other day, cracked a few eggs, put them in a bowl, and I'm ready to stir them up, and I see, oh, dang it, I've got a little eggshell in there. And I hope someone else can relate to this experience, and I'm not the only inept person at making scrambled eggs. But I put my finger in the goop to try to get the eggshell out, and as I am, pressing my finger toward this little tiny piece of eggshell, it moves out of the way. I'm like, oh crap! So I try to follow it, and the faster and more aggressively I follow this little piece of eggshell, the more it eludes me. And it's not until I just go real slow, it's like sneaking up on this piece of eggshell and finally get to it that I can then take it out of my beautiful scrambled eggs.
I like that example. I think most people can relate and think of countless other ways we do this by like rushing or grasping or tensing up. We make things more difficult. In fact, it ties into psychedelic therapy in the sense that surrender is one of the most commonly needed and most important intentions we offer people or help people work on, because what you resist persists. Reminds me of a psychedelic story, in fact, when I was off in a far-off land at an ayahuasca ceremony. Have you heard of Sananga drops?
No. Are these the eye drops? I have, yes.
Yeah. So it's the bark of a shrub, like T. undulatum or something like that. I may be butchering it, but that has all these properties of like antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, and things like that. But it's used by indigenous tribes in certain places like the Amazon and Brazil to clear vision, like to have more clear vision for a hunt at night, for example. And now these days used in some ayahuasca ceremonies to clear the vision, both literally and energetically, to open it up to more perceptions. And some people say, oh, I'm going to see more colors, more vivid things after that. But what it really is, and what I experienced firsthand, was it's a very painful experience. It's like dropping sandpaper in your eyes for a couple minutes. Even though I don't doubt that it has these nice eyeball benefits. But so I was participating in a ceremony once, and they offered it up. And I wasn't really planning on it. I didn't know if I'd jump in. But in that moment, I was like, well, they said something like this, like, if you haven't done a psychedelic trip and a sound bath with Sananga, you haven't lived. So I say, sure, why not? And I'm laying there. They say, lay back, relax. And they put this dropper over your eyes. You have to keep them open or they'll help you. And they put a drop in it. And my first impulse was to tense up and sit up. But the shaman, she was like, oh, no, you don't. Takes her hand on my head and pushes it down to the pillow, says, breathe.
Holy cow.
And so I breathed, and the pain might have been at a 10 or 11 out of 10 for a second, and then it immediately like cut in half, and I was able to let it ride the wave of that through for a minute or two.
The ceremony I was at when they brought this up, I didn't partake. I didn't have the courage, but one of the guys said it help open your third eye, I think is what he said. So what was the after effect like for you?
Well, it's hard to tell as a scientist in a sample size of one. Like,
sure,
every experience is so unique in its own way. But I was certainly glad I had that experience, because I'll never forget the kind of first person full-bodied expression of this idea of like what you resist persists and might get harder. But then after that, it was a beautiful, beautiful ceremony. And I even when offered it the next day, went back in, so I could practice this idea of relax, let go, go with the flow.
Right. Yeah, I have a less psychedelically relevant story here. I remember I was at visiting my brother in Texas, and his son, very young at the time, was on the toilet trying to have a bowel movement. And apparently there's a history here where at the time his son would retain and he'd get backed up, and so he'd have a hard time having a bowel movement. And so my brother's in there like, dude, just go poo. Why don't you just relax and go poo? And then, I'm hearing his son be upset and not pooping. So I told my brother, just give him the iPad so that he can watch something and relax, because him trying to poo is what's preventing him from pooing. I mean, I'm not a poo doctor, Reid, but I am a psychologist. So sure enough, gave him the iPad, and a couple minutes later, success.
Yeah.
So in all his efforts at pleasing his father by having a big dump were preventing him from doing so.
Yeah, I think it's a good example. And even this morning, I mean, we were working with a group of individuals doing group ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, and a lot of the preparation is around relaxing into the experience, because we have this impressive ability as humans to put up walls and tense up and fight. And that's another concept out of Taoism that I really like, is harmony with the natural laws, or this idea that there's this unseen river, this energetic river flowing underneath us, and that might be the way, your dharma, and our work in this idea, and this is just my interpretation, is to sense into that, relax into that, the natural direction of your life. Because if you were trying to swim upstream, you're not going to get very far in life. I mean, sure, you can gently steer it like you're on a lazy river. Why not? But frantically paddling upstream against the natural direction of your life is not productive.
Yeah, not productive. Takes you off the path, I guess.
And not productive is kind of a funny thing to say in Taoism, because because it's certainly not about the outcome either. It's about being present for the natural way life is unfolding.
Which is a hard thing for we Americans. We have a society that was created by Puritans and industrialists and entrepreneurs. Lots of striving has granted us a lot of cool things, I think, but also, I think also proffered us a lot of suffering.
Yeah, there's a French philosopher, Pascal or someone, I can't remember, who said that so much of our difficulties and struggles are a result of our inability to sit still in a room alone.
Yeah, I've heard that one. And a lot of really smart people from the past have touched on this idea of balance. It's not only the Eastern mystics; it's Aristotle and the golden mean. That the golden mean being somewhere between, I wrote it down, excess and deficiency were the words that he used.
Yeah, it reminds me of the yin-yang principle that I think is another core idea of this Taoist philosophy of, everything contains the seed of its opposite. And, in that circle, you have the white part with the black spot, and there's that speck of darkness in the light, and in the dark you have a speck of light, and you can see that speck as the potential for transformation on one end that we all have, and on the other hand, a speck of the inner demon that we also all have and sometimes won't admit. Unlike the Western religious ideals that say, oh, good is all good and evil is evil.
Right.
But this yin-yang approach I so appreciate, because it just shows that this is life. Everything contains the seed of its opposite, and Darth Vader has this speck of potential for good.
And Luke has the speck of potential for bad. Right?
Yeah.
I like that so much more. For me, it helps in my endeavor to have self-compassion. You were talking about the Dharma, or the sort of the natural order of things, this path that if we let go and submit to, life gets more enlightened. To me, being imperfect is part of the laws of physics, like the emotional laws of physics for a human organism. And when I remind myself of that, it's a lot easier to hold my imperfections with compassion, and that container of compassion you were referring to.
Yeah, no, I think it's so crucial. By striving for perfectionism, we're stumbling even more, right?
Yeah, is the pursuit of happiness is a phrase we use all the time, and it's just sort of riffing on what you just said. Maybe it's a unyielding, focused pursuit of happiness is a great way to push happiness further away from you.
Yeah.
Keep it beyond arm's reach.
I heard it described once with a butterfly metaphor, that's the way to catch a butterfly. It's not by chasing it, but it's by sitting still long enough and letting it kind of appear.
So it makes me wonder what this looks like practically. What does walking the middle way, walking the middle path look like in a person's life? What does it look like in your life, Reid?
Well, realizing that not everything is in your control, and not everything works out exactly how you think it will or should.
Right.
Is like a key concept, I'd say, number one. Number two, like we were talking about in DBT, this idea that you're doing the best you can, and you can do better. Yeah, and those are both true, and it's okay, and it's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it results in this kind of beautiful unfolding of life, rather than getting so caught up in the outcome and fighting against how life is actually unfolding.
Right. Yeah, I feel much more at peace, and it's in life when I'm doing that, and it's not a resigned kind of peace. It's hard to describe. I'm struggling to find the right words to describe it. It's like an activated peace. It's a peace from which I feel like I can accomplish my goals, but I'm not holding these goals with an iron grip. These are goals that I hold to with a loose grip, because it's not so important that I accomplish them, that if I don't, I am worthless, or I am a failure, or life has no meaning. And that's one of the things that has always impressed me about people who I meet who seem enlightened, is they're often driven people. They often have accomplished things that the outside world would laud, would praise. But they also don't seem desperately attached to those outcomes. It's almost like you were referring to earlier, that by relaxing and letting go, they accomplished more. That paradoxical phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, pick your sports analogy too. I mean, I grew up playing golf competitively, and baseball for that matter too. I think about either one, your golf swing, your baseball swing. If you tense up and fight too much, like, you could see it right then and there. It's not going to have the same result compared to if you relax into it. There's this idea in the yoga world that I like of the balance, or the intersection between effort and ease, is that middle path. And you practice this in a yoga pose. Like, you're not tensed up so much that you can't breathe, because that's not going to serve you well. You're finding that that minimal amount of effort to be able to relax into this place and stay there.
Right.
With this idea that fitness in that way is like doing more while breathing less, for example.
Yeah, you basically just described the zone, or being in flow. I always forget how to pronounce the dude's name. Csikszentmihalyi talked about flow states, and Stephen Kotler writes about it in The Art of Impossible, that it's to be in a flow state, or to be in the zone is to be in this weird mixture of complete relaxation and engagement focus. So when I hear you talk about golf or yoga, that totally makes sense to me. In fact, it makes me think of, so just to cast a broad net to all of our listeners who might not be into yoga or sports, video games. I enjoy the occasional video game. If you want to press a button fast, I remember when I was a kid, we'd have these games on the old Nintendo.
Yeah.
That however fast you could press that A button, you'd run faster or further. So we'd get a battery and scrape it over the button, just try to press it as fast as we could. But I was watching this video of these people who are like pro button pressers, and they talk about it. It's not about tensing your muscle and forcing your finger to press the button fast. It's a disinhibition thing. It's allowing your nervous system to go at that rate, and that it's not until you relax into it that you can go that fast.
Yeah.
Weird.
No, I think it's a great example. And then the other way I'd say, practically speaking, that I try to apply these things is through acceptance. There's the ACT therapy modality, acceptance and commitment therapy, but it's a Taoist kind of core concept as well of it's not I'm right and you're wrong. It's like I'm right and you're right.
Yeah.
And finding that balance place there as well.
Can you imagine what the American, and I'm sure other countries' political spectrum, political situation would look like if we were a little bit more that way? We're so polarized, and we have a social media engine that creates polarization, and we need to practice more of this. I'm right and you're right, I think.
Yeah, and we're great mirrors for each other as humans, and especially in close relationships, it's a chance to practice that, figure out, to get away from those extremes of jumping on someone's literal words by saying, no, I don't never take the trash out, or you exaggerate too much. Just getting away from those extremes and finding that balanced, accepting place. And it's not about giving up, or not about not holding boundaries. It's about not, creating unnecessary resistance. And so you can really use your strength for inspired action and what really matters.
I'm glad you mentioned that. The part about it's not about not giving up or not having boundaries. I think a lot of people, when they come across this idea of, acceptance and non-action, they think, well, so you're just sort of resigned to being beset upon by whatever the universe has for you, and you're not going to try to steer your ship at all. And I don't think that's necessarily what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's more about the paradoxes of you can be open and private. You can, cheer yourself on and acknowledge your mistakes, no problem.
Yeah, that concept of the warrior poet, that you can hold in both hands. Well, we've talked about it from a lot of different perspectives, yin yang, that kind of thing. Another example is, the middle way between something like recklessness and cowardice. You could imagine being really reckless and impulsive and just going headlong into anything that might be risky as an unbalanced approach to life. And then the opposite end of the spectrum being never trying anything, never going out on a limb. And that in the middle you have courage, where courage is, you feel the fear, you assess the risks, but you choose to take calculated action. Yeah.
Oh, it's so true. It shows up in everything, work and rest, caring for yourself and caring for others. And it's just this idea that, there's a natural middle path, a natural order of things where all of that can be true simultaneously. And like you were saying about society, we get so on edge and ready to pounce that it's spilling over in kind of insane ways in the media, in politics, in the news, and in the way we, fight and create so much suffering amongst ourselves as humans.
Yeah, we don't give each other the benefit of the doubt. That's the phrase that was coming to my mind when you were talking about it, and like in a marriage or whatever. Is we make these assumptions about each other, about people who we perceive to be on the other end of the political aisle, or who believe something differently than we believe metaphysically or religiously, or who like the other sports team. Like we make these assumptions about people that the human mind has evolved to do. Cognitive heuristics makes human life possible, right?
Yeah.
These shortcuts that we have. But when they get malignant, they turn into these prejudices. And prejudices are easy. It's harder, I think, in a lot of ways, until you become familiar with it, how to walk the middle path when it comes to somebody who has a different political opinion than you do.
Mm-hmm. And in relationship, I like what you said. There's a French philosopher, who I quite like, named Alain de Botton. Well, he has a French name. I believe he's British. But he says, to love is to be generous in one's interpretation of the other's behavior.
I like that.
Seeking first to understand, or giving each other the benefit of the doubt, knowing that, we're all doing the best we can. We all mess up quite a lot,
Right.
and it's all okay.
Yeah. I've been married for 16 years, and I was talking to my wife about why we think our marriage is working. Because we've certainly both changed a lot over the course of our marriage and 3 kids. And that's kind of what we landed on, is that for whatever reason, we have a tendency to give each other the benefit of the doubt. To first assume that the other was doing their best, even if they've done something that was annoying or hurtful.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. And I think that's, in my opinion, one of the key ingredients for that harmony and peace we're talking about, whether it's in marriage, in other aspects of life, is that acknowledgement that, life's a journey, we're all on it. We all may be a hot mess at times, different times than others. We're all walking each other home and giving each other the benefit of the doubt, a shoulder to lean on, a helping hand, and asking for help in return is, kind of the natural order of things.
Yeah. So if folks are wondering, how do I practice balance? How do I practice walking the middle way? I think we've touched on it a few times, but, ask yourself, where do I default to? When I get triggered, when I get stressed, do I default to anger? Do I default to self-judgment? And after that inventory, and you find yourself defaulting to unbalanced perspectives, then that gives you a good sense of what you can work on. You're never going to be perfectly balanced. We're not Thanos. We're not looking for perfect balance. That's a paradox in and of itself. Right? Yep. The effort is to be imperfectly balanced and just find your way. I think of somebody on a balance beam. If I'm on a balance beam, I am not ever stable. To me, the act of balancing is the act of constant course correction. I am off center the whole time, and I only ever pass center when I'm trying to correct to it and then overcorrect. So maybe the oscillation gets a little less violent as you get more skilled. This idea in Buddhism of skilled and unskilled versus perfect or imperfect, which I really like.
Yeah.
So my skillful application of the strategies I know work for me to keep me in balance is what you strive for, not perfection, whether that's meditation, exercise, getting to know the kind of foods that throw you off balance or keep you in balance, creating boundaries, preventing relationships that drain you, or that you can't function healthy in. These are all examples of how to walk that middle way, I think. Taking your medicine as prescribed if it helps you, that kind of thing.
Especially important in cultures where there's a strong religious influence. As beautiful as that may be, for some there is a risk of guilt and shame, right? And I like to remember the root of a word like sin is really an archery term, meaning something like missing the mark. It just means try again. Like keep going, keep practicing.
Love that.
Keep putting one foot in front of the other.
Try again.
Because success is this, like, it's this direction. It's a progressive realization of a worthy ideal at whatever pace it unfolds, with however many steps forward, however many back.
Yeah. I really like in his guided meditations, he'll often say, if you find yourself lost in thought, simply begin again.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the turn of phrase, simply begin again. It's, again, it's not, the point is not to be perfect. And when you miss the mark, as you're saying, Reid, it's just to reiterate it, it's a signal, not that you are bad, that you're a bad archer.
Yeah.
It's a signal that it's time to try again.
Yeah, he doesn't say, beat yourself up and start over.
Yeah. How dare you?
Yeah.
Bad meditator.
There's something I came across on Taoism that I'd like to read and get your thoughts on, if I could. It kind of illustrates these paradoxes. It said, in Taoism, the sage is faced with paradoxes that would mortify most people, but don't seem to bother him or her at all. The sage is detached yet compassionate, enjoys life yet does not cling to it, is a perfectionist yet indifferent to success or failure, is a man, woman of honor yet avoids reaping honor, ignores ethics and morals yet lives a life of the highest moral order, does not strive yet achieves, knows the answers but prefers to remain silent, has the innocence and playfulness of a child but incredible inner strength.
Man, if that isn't the middle way, I don't know what is. It sounds like what I've been searching for my entire life. A way to have, maybe this is the wrong way to say it, but a way to have the best of both worlds. The benefits of, striving, and also the benefits of non-action, without all their pitfalls. I don't know. Am I misunderstanding that? Is that possible?
I've seen it play out. Like if you look at, if I look at people's business lives or personal lives, different achievements, even when I reflect on my own life, the times when I've given up the fight or relaxed the hustle and let go of any attachment to outcome, that's when the magic happens, it seems. And I was even talking to my brother about this, who has a clothing company online. And he did Beloved Shirts and was on Shark Tank, and now he has one called Flex Living, one called Shroom Beach, and he was just saying that it was striking to him when he started practicing this, letting go of attachment to the outcome or non-striving, like his like success in business and many other areas just like tripled.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I've heard that before too. I've got a friend who's a really successful real estate guy, and he said the same thing, that when he discovered plant medicine, he went to therapy, was able to relax a bit, that business did better. This is not a promise, folks, that if but it's a phenomenon we've noticed.
Yeah, and you can test it out in little ways in your life, and you can test it out in many ways in your own personal practices, whether it's kind of meditation or movement practice or in relationships.
Well, Reid, anything else you can think of on this topic of balance in the middle way? I think we've ping-ponged to some really interesting topics and hopefully given people some actionable advice.
Yeah, I think we've covered it. The remaining thing that comes to mind about Taoism or this walking the middle path is just the beginner's mind.
Yeah.
Just a one final reminder, and we've talked about it before on here, is to empty your cup and to kind of let go of all those preconceived notions and conditioned ideas of what you think you know, because in fact most of what we think we know about the universe is probably not true. And
Yeah.
we let go of all that. And that's another example of how the real magic can happen.
Yeah, another example of that sort of those paradoxes of being confident and humble at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I think of the scientists that I know, the PhDs that I know, the medical professionals that I know, the ones I like the most, the ones I would go to the most are the ones that I perceive to be very knowledgeable and also very humble about that knowledge.
Yeah.
And not humble in the sense of like, oh, I don't know anything, right? That's not false humility. It's the things that I know I am open to being wrong about. They're not dogmatic about their ideologies or the knowledge that they have.
Yeah, it's another good example of that sage we're talking about, of what qualities we might not strive, but relax into emulating.
Yeah. All right, folks, live that sage life, yo. Strive for sagehood. Thanks for listening. Thank you, dear listener, for listening. It means a lot to me. Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers is brought to you by Novamind, a mental health company that specializes in psychedelic medicine and research. You can learn more about Novamind's mission to increase access to legal, safe, and evidence-based psychedelic medicine at novamind.ca. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're using to listen or watch. Also, if you're feeling generous today, please leave us a glowing review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. If you'd like to reach out to us with questions, suggestions, scathing criticisms, etc., please email us at psychfrontiers@novamind.ca. Thanks again.